It was meant to be a day of celebration, a moment to remind the world of the enduring strength and glamour of Britain's royal family. The palace gates were open wide, crowds gathered in waves, their cheers echoing like an ancient hymn across the gardens of Windsor. Little did they know, beneath the gleaming surface of the monarchy's grandeur, a storm was brewing, a storm that would shatter trust, ignite fear, and almost claim the life of one of its youngest and most beloved members. As the sun rose over London that morning, Princess Charlotte woke in her nursery, unaware of the sinister plot that had been woven into her destiny. To her, it was simply an exciting day where she would step into the limelight, wearing a crown for the first time, a symbol of her lineage, her future, and her place in history. But unseen hands had worked tirelessly in the shadows to ensure this crown was no mere ornament. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Somewhere in the quiet halls of the palace, Queen Camilla sat in her private quarters. Her demeanor was calm, almost serene, as she reviewed final preparations for the ceremony. To the public, Camilla had reinvented herself as a stabilizing force in the monarchy, a woman who had weathered scandals and emerged as the queen consort. Yet those who knew her best whispered of a different Camilla. Behind closed doors, there was talk of her lingering resentment towards those who seemed to outshine her, of her determination to maintain her status even if it meant silencing rivals. The ceremonial crown had been in her possession for weeks, allegedly undergoing restoration in preparation for this day. Crafted centuries ago, the crown was a masterpiece of gold filigree and precious stones, but in recent years it had fallen out of use. Camilla insisted on its revival for Charlotte's appearance, framing it as an act of honoring tradition. Few questioned her decision. After all, wasn't she now the matriarch of the royal family? But Princess Anne did. And the Princess Royal had always been fiercely protective of her family, especially the children. Her years of service had sharpened her instincts to detect danger, no matter how well disguised. And as she watched preparations unfold in the days leading up to the event, an unease settled deep in her bones. There was something about Camilla's insistence on this particular crown that didn't sit right with her. On the morning of the ceremony, Anne's fears grew stronger. A conversation with a trusted royal jeweler the night before had left her sleepless. The craftsman had confessed, reluctantly, that the crown had undergone unusual treatment, restoration involving substances he didn't recognize. He had raised concerns about its safety but was promptly dismissed from the project. Anne's mind raced. Could it be that something far more sinister than negligence was at play? She thought of Charlotte's bright smile, her curious eyes as she twirled in her ceremonial dress during the last rehearsal. The thought of anything happening to that child sent a chill down Anne's spine. She resolved then and there to intervene, even if it meant risking her own reputation within the family. As the clock ticked towards the hour of the ceremony, the grand ballroom began to fill. Dignitaries, celebrities, and high-ranking officials mingled under crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with anticipation. Cameras were stationed strategically, ready to broadcast the royal event to millions around the globe. Charlotte was led in by her parents, Prince William and Princess Catherine, both radiating pride. The little princess, though only a child, carried herself with remarkable composure, trained to perfection for moments like this. Behind her, the crown rested on a velvet cushion, carried by a page boy, its gold catching the light like a beacon. Anne's heart pounded as she took her seat near the front. She watched Camilla from across the hall. The queen consort was smiling, but Anne noticed how her fingers clutched the armrest of her chair, white-knuckled. It was a small detail, but to Anne, it spoke volumes. As the moment drew near, a hush fell over the room. The master of ceremonies announced that the time had come for the crowning. Charlotte approached the dais, her steps light but confident. The crown was lifted high. Anne's breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, it was as if time slowed to a crawl. A memory flashed in Anne's mind. Years earlier, her own mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had warned her that power within the palace was rarely given freely. It was seized, guarded, and often, it was poisoned figuratively and, in rare cases, literally. What if this wasn't just paranoia? What if Camilla's plan wasn't merely to humiliate or overshadow Charlotte, but to remove her as a threat altogether? And bolted upright. The crowd gasped as she pushed past startled attendants, her heels clacking against the marble floor. She didn't care about decorum. She didn't care about headlines or whispers. All she knew was that she had to get to Charlotte before it was too late. Stop. Anne's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. The page boy froze mid-motion. William and Catherine turned in shock, their eyes wide as in lunch for the crown. Her hands closed around it, and she yanked it away from Charlotte's delicate head. The silence that followed was deafening, and collapsed to her knees, clutching the crown to her chest as tears streamed down her face. "You don't understand," she whispered hoarsely, though no one around her yet comprehended the depth of her terror. In that instant, the royal family was plunged into chaos, and the world began to ask, what had Queen Camilla planned for the young princess? What toxic secrets lay hidden within the gilded crown? And how far was Anne willing to go to protect the one she loved? The grand event had been marketed as a revival of the monarchy's deepest traditions, a spectacle designed to showcase the unity and resilience of Britain's royal family in a modern world. Weeks of meticulous planning had gone into every detail, from the cascading floral arrangements in Windsor's ballroom to the embroidered insignias stitched by hand into the ceremonial robes. The air was thick with a mixture of excitement and tension, as if everyone present felt the unspoken truth that the royal family's future wasn't as secure as their polished smiles suggested. For Princess Charlotte, the youngest star of this glittering display, the day had begun with the innocence only a child could hold. She had giggled as her nanny helped her into her flowing white gown, its fabric shimmering like fresh snow in the dim morning light. She twirled before the mirror, her eyes lighting up when her mother, Princess Catherine, placed a tiny tiara on her head for practice. The child's laughter echoed through the hallways, blissfully unaware that her life was teetering on the edge of a hidden abyss. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla oversaw preparations with a calculated calmness. She moved like a conductor guiding an orchestra, giving quiet instructions to staff, ensuring every piece of the day aligned with her vision. To the public, Camilla was the rehabilitated queen, a figure who had risen from decades of controversy into the embrace of royal legitimacy. Yet inside the palace, there remained those who suspected her ambitions had never truly softened. In private moments, she had expressed her unease over Charlotte's growing popularity. The little girl's charm and resemblance to both Diana and Elizabeth had not gone unnoticed by the public. Headlines praising Charlotte as the people's princess in waiting were becoming uncomfortably frequent. For Camilla, who had spent years wrestling the public's favor, this sudden affection for a child seemed like a dangerous omen. Some believed her efforts to revive the old ceremonial crown were merely symbolic. Others, like Princess Anne, saw something more sinister, and had always been a figure of stoicism and duty, rarely allowing her emotions to cloud her judgment. But in the days before the ceremony, she found herself haunted by a quiet unease she couldn't shake. The crown, which Camilla had personally overseen during restoration, nagged at her conscience. It wasn't until a passing comment from the royal jeweler that her concern transformed into outright fear. "I wasn't allowed to inspect it fully," he had admitted in a hushed voice. "But there's something odd about the coating used on its inner band." I tried to speak up, but Her Majesty's aides dismissed me, and felt a chill settle over her. Could it be that Camilla was reckless enough to risk exposing a child to danger? Or worse, was she deliberate in her actions? On the morning of the ceremony, Anne made her decision. She would remain close, eyes sharp, ready to intervene if her worst fears were realized. As dignitaries filed into the hall, flashes from photographers lit the room like lightning. Trumpets blared, signaling the royal family's entrance. The atmosphere was electric, but underneath the pomp and pageantry was a gnawing tension, almost imperceptible to the outside world. Princess Charlotte stepped forward, her small hands clutching the folds of her gown. William and Catherine beamed at their daughter, unaware that their pride was about to be eclipsed by terror. The crown was presented on a crimson velvet cushion, glistening under the chandeliers. Anne's pulse quickened as she watched the pageboy carry it forward. To everyone else, it was a beautiful relic. To Anne, it had become a ticking bomb. As Charlotte knelt before the dais, time seemed to stretch, and saw Camilla lean forward ever so slightly in her chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. There it was, the faintest flicker of anticipation in her eyes. Anne's heart thundered in her chest. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to move. The master of ceremonies lifted the crown high, by the grace of tradition and the lineage of queens before her, and stood abruptly, the scraping of her chair drawing startled glances. "No!" Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. Gasps erupted as Anne strode forward, her heels pounding against the marble. William looked up, confusion flashing across his face. "And what are you?" Before he could finish, Anne was on the dais. Her hands shot out, gripping the crown just as it was about to touch Charlotte's head. The room descended into chaos. Cameras clicked furiously. Voices rose in alarm. and clutched the crown to her chest, her knuckles white, tears brimming in her eyes as she fell to her knees beside Charlotte. "You don't understand," she choked out, her voice breaking. I had to. I had to protect her." Charlotte whimpered, burying her face into her mother's gown. William stepped forward, his expression caught between rage and fear. "And, explain yourself. Now." But Anne couldn't speak. Her body trembled with the weight of what she had just prevented, or thought she had. Somewhere in the corner of the room, Camilla rose slowly from her seat, her expression unreadable. Her hands were clasped in front of her, but Anne noticed a tremor in her fingers. Was it shock or guilt? The questions would soon spill out beyond the palace walls, igniting a scandal that threatened to consume the monarchy. But in that moment, only one thing mattered to, and Charlotte was safe. For now, the crown had always been more than an accessory. It was a symbol of power, history, and the monarchy's enduring grip on tradition. But for Princess Anne, it had begun to represent something far more dangerous, a calculated weapon, one that could have destroyed her young niece in front of millions. 2 days before the ceremony, the crown had arrived at Windsor under heavy security, carried in a reinforced glass case by attendants who wore pristine white gloves. At first glance, it seemed to shimmer innocently under the light, an intricate band of gold filigree, studded with sapphires and pearls, its inner ring polished so brightly it seemed to glow. To the unsuspecting eye, it was perfection incarnate, a masterpiece of the royal jeweler's art. But to Anne's trained eye, something about it felt off. She had first raised her suspicions in the private drawing room during a conversation with the crown's restorer, an elderly man who had served the royals for decades. His face was pale as he spoke in a hushed tone, his eyes darting towards the hallway as though afraid someone might overhear. "They told me to focus on the external restoration," he said, wringing his hands. "But I wasn't permitted to inspect the interior band. Her Majesty's aides insisted it was already treated. When I questioned why, they told me it wasn't my place." And frowned. "Did you smell anything unusual? Or see any residues?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "A faint chemical scent. Metallic, acrid. But I wasn't allowed to investigate further." That revelation lingered in Anne's mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. Her memory drifted back to stories her mother once told her about how, in the days of ancient courts, crowns and jewelry had been used not just for ceremony but for subtle assassinations. Toxic metals, slow-acting poisons, they were tools of the power-hungry, reserved for times when daggers and open violence were too risky. Could Camilla, now queen consort, really stoop to such tactics? It was a question Anne didn't want to answer, but the thought kept clawing at her like a persistent itch. In the days leading to the ceremony, Camilla's behavior only deepened Anne's concerns. The queen consort had taken an unusual interest in the event's proceedings. Normally content to leave such details to staff, she personally oversaw Charlotte's wardrobe, the order of the procession, and, most notably, the crown's presentation. Every detail was to her specifications, every decision made without consultation. She said it was to honor tradition, and muttered to herself as she walked the palace corridors that night, her boots echoing on the cold stone floors. But whose tradition? The more Anne thought about it, the more convinced she became that something was amiss. Charlotte's public appearances had been drawing increasing adoration. Social media flooded with images of the little girl waving shyly at the crowd, her smile compared endlessly to the late Princess Diana. The press spoke of her as a future queen who might restore the royal family's fractured reputation. To Camilla, who had spent decades clawing her way into acceptance, that level of public adoration directed toward a child may have felt like a threat. And stopped in her tracks as a chilling thought entered her mind. What if this crown wasn't meant to celebrate Charlotte's future, but to erase it? The next morning, Anne requested to see the crown under the guise of final inspections. But when she arrived at the secure vault, she was told it had already been moved to the ceremonial chamber. Her access was denied by a stern-faced aide who claimed, "Her Majesty wishes it undisturbed until the event." That was the moment Anne's unease hardened into determination. She wouldn't stand idly by. On the morning of the ceremony, as Charlotte was dressed in her ceremonial gown and positioned herself in the wings of the ballroom, she watched the pageboy carry the crown forward, the gold gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Every step felt like a countdown, every tick of the clock tightening her chest. She thought of the jeweler's warning again, the metallic scent, the unexplained treatment. As the master of ceremonies approached Charlotte with the crown, Anne's fingers dug into the folds of her skirt. She saw Camilla leaning forward in her seat, Her expression controlled, too controlled. And then saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible glimmer inside the crown's band, like a residue left behind by some chemical application. Her breath caught. She couldn't wait any longer, and sprang forward. The room erupted in murmurs as she dashed past stunned attendants, her heart thundering in her ears. "Stop!" The command tore through the air. The pageboy froze mid-step, Charlotte's wide eyes staring at her aunt in confusion, and snatched the crown before it could descend on the child's head. The band was warm to the touch, too warm for an object resting in a cool hall. She pressed her nose close and caught it, the same acrid metallic scent the jeweler had described. It was real. She stumbled back, clutching the crown to her chest as tears welled in her eyes. Not today, not her. Around her, chaos reigned. Catherine swept Charlotte into her arms protectively, her face pale with fear. William advanced on, and his voice sharp. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" And shook her head, her voice breaking. "I saved her. I had to." From across the hall, Camilla watched silently. Her face betrayed nothing. No anger, no shock, only that same eerie calm. It was in that moment and realized something chilling. Camilla wasn't surprised at all. The trap had been years in the making, though no one outside the inner circle of the palace could see it for what it was. To the world, Queen Camilla was the dutiful partner of King Charles, a woman who had risen from being one of the most controversial figures in royal history to a position of respect. Her journey to the throne had been long and arduous, and for many, she symbolized resilience. But to a select few within the monarchy's gilded walls, her resilience looked more like quiet ruthlessness. Camilla had always been strategic. After decades spent as an outsider, she knew how to play the long game, to move pieces on the chessboard of power so subtly that no one even noticed until it was too late. So when she took a personal interest in the ceremonial crown, a relic that had sat untouched for nearly a century, many in the palace assumed it was merely another of her efforts to modernize the monarchy. But for Anne, who had spent her entire life navigating the treacherous currents of royal politics, there was an edge to Camilla's behavior that was impossible to ignore. Weeks before the ceremony, Camilla had convened a meeting with her closest aides and advisors in her private chambers. Behind closed doors, she laid out her vision for a coronation-like celebration to honor Charlotte, to cement the child's role in the public eye. "It will be a symbolic gesture," Camilla said, her voice calm yet firm. "The people crave tradition, and this family could use a unifying moment." On the surface, it sounded reasonable, even admirable. But to those who knew Camilla well, there was something chilling in the way her eyes lingered on the images of Charlotte projected on the screen before her. "Her popularity is extraordinary," one aide remarked cautiously. Camilla's lips curved into a faint smile, though her tone carried an unmistakable sharpness. "Yes, too extraordinary for someone so young. Attention like that can become dangerous. We must ensure she understands her place." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. In the weeks that followed, Camilla began overseeing the crown's restoration personally. She handpicked the artisans, approved every detail, and insisted on private consultations with the jeweler in charge. When questions arose about her intense involvement, her aides deflected with practiced ease. "Her Majesty simply wants everything to be perfect," they said, and wasn't convinced. She had noticed Camilla's growing discomfort with Charlotte's increasing visibility. Every newspaper headline celebrating the child as the future of the monarchy seemed to erode Camilla's carefully cultivated image. Rumors began circulating among staff that Camilla felt overshadowed, threatened even, by the bright young princess who had captured the public's affection. Then came the first sign that something was truly wrong. The jeweler tasked with restoring the crown, a man entrusted implicitly, approached her late one evening. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "Your Royal Highness," he whispered, "there is something you should know." He spoke of being forbidden from inspecting the inner band of the crown, of being told to focus only on cosmetic repairs. He mentioned an odd request from Camilla's aides to apply a particular polish that he had never used before. "They insisted it was harmless," he said, "but the smell, it burned my nose. I felt ill for hours after handling it." And listened in silence, her expression hardening as the pieces began to align in her mind. "Could this substance cause harm?" she asked. "I can't say for certain," the jeweler admitted. "But if someone were to wear the crown for an extended period, it's possible." And stomach twisted. She thanked him and sent him away, but sleep eluded her that night. She kept seeing Charlotte's face, bright, innocent, trusting, and Camilla's, with that cold, calculating glint in her eyes. The next day, and confronted one of Camilla's senior aides. "Why wasn't I informed of these changes to the restoration process?" she demanded. The aide's expression flickered just long enough for Anne to notice. "It was a matter of efficiency, Your Royal Highness." Nothing more. Anne knew a lie when she heard one. As the ceremony approached, she watched from the shadows as Camilla moved through the palace with an air of quiet triumph. Every detail of the event bore her signature. From the guest list to the floral arrangements to the music that would play as Charlotte ascended the dais. It wasn't until Anne heard Camilla speaking in hushed tones to a confidant that her worst fears crystallized. "The crown will remind everyone of who holds power here," Camilla murmured. "Even the child must learn that she is not untouchable." And froze in the hallway, her breath catching in her throat. It was no longer a question of suspicion. It was certainty. Camilla had set a trap, and Charlotte was walking straight into it. Princess Anne had always trusted her instincts. It was a skill honed over decades of navigating palace politics, public scrutiny, and the constant weight of duty. In the royal family, intuition was often a survival tool. And this time, her instincts screamed louder than ever before. Something was wrong. 2 nights before the ceremony, Anne sat alone in her private study, staring at the flickering flames of the fireplace. The room, usually her sanctuary, felt stifling. The words of the jeweler echoed relentlessly in her mind. "The inner band is coated with something unfamiliar. I wasn't allowed to test it." Anne closed her eyes and tried to reason with herself. Perhaps it was nothing, perhaps the restoration team had simply used a new type of preservative, something harmless. But no matter how she tried to rationalize, the unease only grew heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. She remembered how fiercely her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had protected the institution. Elizabeth had been wary of outsiders, of those who entered the family circle with their own ambitions, and had inherited that same wariness. She had always kept a cautious eye on Camilla, even as the rest of the family softened towards her. Now, every interaction, every detail of Camilla's recent behavior replayed in Anne's mind with sinister undertones. There was the way Camilla had taken over the crown's restoration, despite never showing interest in such projects before. There were the private meetings with aides, the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when Anne entered a room. And there was the unsettling conversation she had overheard between Camilla and her personal secretary, discussing Charlotte. "She's a sweet child," the secretary had said kindly. Camilla's response had been chilling in its coldness. Sweetness fades. Influence doesn't. Best she learns that early. And remembered how her hand had tightened around the doorknob that day, the restraint it took to keep herself from confronting Camilla then and there. Now, with the ceremony looming, Anne felt a mounting dread in her chest. She had tried to warn her brother, King Charles. "Have you noticed how closely Camilla's managing the event?" she had asked during a quiet breakfast. Charles, weary from his own battles with the press and internal family divisions, waved her off. "Camilla simply wants the day to run smoothly, and we could use some good press." And leaned forward. "Good press isn't worth risking Charlotte's safety." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Safety? What are you implying?" "I'm saying," and said carefully, "that I don't trust her motives." Her brother's face darkened. "Anne, you've never approved of Camilla. This isn't the time for old grudges. She's my wife, and she's queen now. You'll have to accept that." And bit back the words she wanted to say. She could see it was pointless. Charles was blind to the subtle power plays happening under his nose. He wanted peace within the family too desperately to admit the possibility of betrayal. After breakfast, Anne confided in Catherine instead. The Princess of Wales listened intently, her brow furrowed. "Do you really think Camilla would go that far?" And nodded grimly. "I don't know what she's capable of anymore. But if I'm wrong, the worst that happens is I look foolish. If I'm right, and I do nothing." Catherine's eyes darted toward the door of the nursery, where Charlotte's laughter echoed faintly. "We can't take that chance." And placed a hand on Catherine's arm. "Stay close to her on the day, and let me handle the rest." As the hours slipped away, and began her own quiet investigation, she summoned 2 trusted members of her staff, instructing them to observe Camilla's movements and report back discreetly. They returned with unsettling news. "Her Majesty had the crown removed from the vault this morning," one whispered. She ordered her aides to lock the ceremonial chamber until the event, and felt her stomach knot. The crown was now beyond her reach. That night, she lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought of Charlotte's soft curls, her bright blue eyes so full of innocence. and had never been one to dote on children, but something about Charlotte had melted her guarded heart. The little girl reminded her of Elizabeth, her courage, her spark, her potential, and whispered into the dark, as if speaking to her late mother. I won't let her be another pawn in this game. Not while I'm still breathing. The morning of the ceremony arrived with heavy gray clouds hanging over Windsor, as though the weather itself sensed what was to come. And dressed in her formal attire, her military medals glinting on her chest, her expression steely, she took her place near the front of the ballroom, every sense on high alert. When Camilla entered, the queen consort's face was serene, her every movement elegant and precise. But to Anne, her composure looked rehearsed, her smile too perfect. The orchestra struck up the opening notes as the crowd hushed. Anne's eyes never left the crown, now resting on a velvet cushion in the hands of the page boy. It was closer now, within arm's reach, but not yet close enough. Anne gripped the edge of her seat, her heart pounding. If there was even the slightest chance she was right, she had no choice. She would act, even if it meant tearing the day apart. The moments leading up to the ceremony felt like a slow, suffocating crawl toward disaster. Princess Anne sat stiffly in her seat, her eyes fixed on the ceremonial crown resting on its velvet cushion. The hall around her buzzed with muted conversations, cameras clicking as dignitaries and celebrities whispered their awe at the grandeur. Yet to Anne, the air felt poisoned. Every breath she took carried the weight of suspicion, and every tick of the clock throbbed like a warning in her ears. Her thoughts returned to the jeweler's words she had replayed in her mind so often it was as though they had etched themselves into her bones. The polish wasn't familiar. It smelled wrong, acrid, metallic. I felt lightheaded just working with it for a few minutes. If worn for any length of time, the wearer might experience headaches, nausea, worse. Worse. That single word had clawed at her every moment since, and knew the crown's history. It was an antique piece, dating back to the Georgian era. In those times, the use of arsenic and lead in gilding and decorative finishes wasn't uncommon. But modern restoration protocols had eliminated such dangers, at least they should have. So why, after all these years, would Camilla insist on a restoration that included potentially dangerous materials? The only answer that made sense chilled into her core. Across the room, Camilla sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. To the casual observer, she was the very image of dignity. But Anne's sharp eyes caught a fleeting expression in Camilla's face, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Satisfaction? Anticipation? It was almost imperceptible, but Anne saw it. The orchestra fell silent. A hush spread through the ballroom as the master of ceremonies stepped forward to announce the start of the ritual. Anne's fingers curled tightly into her skirt. She leaned forward, her breath shallow. By the grace of heritage and the lineage of queens before her, the master intoned, we place upon the head of Princess Charlotte this crown, in honor of her place in the future of the monarchy. The page boy stepped forward with deliberate care, carrying the crown toward Charlotte. The little princess looked angelic in her white gown, her wide eyes sparkling as she knelt on the dais. To her, this was a fairy tale come true. But Anne's vision tunneled. She saw only the gold band, the faint shimmer of residue along its inner curve, and the horrifying possibility of what might happen next. Her breath caught in her throat as the page boy raised the crown higher. At that moment, and made her decision. She surged to her feet. Stop. The single word cracked through the stillness like a whip. Gasps echoed across the room as dozens of heads turned in her direction. The page boy froze mid-motion, his hands trembling as he looked to the master of ceremonies for guidance. Anne's boots struck the marble floor with rapid precision as she strode forward. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but her voice was steady, cold with resolve. Put it down, she commanded. The master hesitated. Your Royal Highness, I said, put it down. The page boy placed the crown back on its cushion, his hands shaking violently, and reached the dais and snatched the crown in one swift motion, holding it aloft for all to see. Does no one smell it? She demanded, her voice carrying across the hall. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. William stepped forward, his face a mixture of shock and anger. And what are you doing? Have you lost your mind? And turned sharply to him. No, William. But if your daughter had worn this for even an hour, she might have fallen gravely ill, or worse. A stunned silence followed her words. Catherine clutched Charlotte to her chest, her face pale. And is this true? And nodded grimly. There's something in the lining of this crown. Something toxic. Camilla rose from her chair slowly. Her face was calm, too calm. "This is an outrageous accusation," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge like a sharpened blade. "You are embarrassing the entire family." Anne's eyes locked onto hers. Not half as much as you would have if Charlotte collapsed before the world's cameras. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room, and handed the crown to a nearby guard. "Seal it in an airtight case and send it for testing immediately. Do it now." As the guards hurried to obey, and sank to her knees beside Charlotte, tears pricking her eyes. She pulled her niece into a tight embrace. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." Charlotte's tiny arms wrapped around her neck, and Anne felt the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. The trap had been set, but Anne had sprung it just in time. Or had she? Across the room, Camilla's expression remained unreadable. But for a split second, Anne thought she saw it again, that faint flicker of something dark and knowing in the queen consort's eyes. A chill ran down Anne's spine. She wasn't sure if the battle had been won, or if it had only just begun. The morning of the grand ceremony began with a sky as gray and heavy as stone. Winds whispered through the ancient corridors of Windsor, rattling the stained glass windows as if nature itself knew what was about to unfold. Inside the palace, however, no one dared to acknowledge the undercurrent of tension. Attendants moved with brisk precision, smoothing tablecloths, polishing silver, and arranging bouquets of white roses to perfection. Princess Charlotte was already awake, dressed in her ceremonial gown and sitting patiently in the royal nursery. She looked every bit the miniature princess the world adored, her soft curls pinned back, her delicate shoes shining like pearls. Catherine hovered nearby, her smile warm but faintly strained. William paced in front of the window, pretending to admire the view but glancing nervously at the grandfather clock every few seconds. "It's going to be fine," Catherine said gently, resting a hand on her husband's arm. William nodded stiffly. "I know. It's just, she's so young for all this attention." Charlotte giggled as her nanny held up a small mirror for her to see her reflection. "Do you think Granny Anne will like my dress?" she asked innocently. At the mention of Anne, Catherine's fingers tightened briefly around William's arm. There had been whispers between her and Anne, quiet exchanges behind closed doors. Anne's warning still echoed in Catherine's mind. "Stay close to her. Don't let her out of your sight for a moment." "Granny Anne will love it," Catherine said softly, smoothing the folds of her daughter's dress. But in her heart, unease twisted like a knot. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Queen Camilla stood before a gilded mirror in her private chambers. Her attendants fluttered nervously as they adjusted her gown and fastened her jewels. Camilla's reflection revealed a serene, carefully composed expression, but her eyes glimmered with an emotion harder to define: anticipation. "Is the crown prepared?" she asked without turning. "Yes, Your Majesty," one aide replied. "It has been placed in the ceremonial hall, just as you instructed." Camilla allowed herself a faint smile. "Good. Today will be unforgettable." The aide hesitated before asking, "Do you expect any issues, ma'am?" Camilla's gaze flicked to him, sharp as a dagger. "Not if everyone performs their role as they should." The aide bowed his head quickly and retreated. In the grand ballroom, rows of chairs filled with high-ranking officials, foreign dignitaries, and celebrities. The air buzzed with anticipation, cameras already rolling to broadcast the royal spectacle live across the globe. Velvet curtains framed the dais where Charlotte would kneel, the crown gleaming on its cushion under a beam of light. Princess Anne arrived early, her uniform immaculate, her expression unreadable. She walked the perimeter of the hall, scanning every detail, every movement of the staff. She spotted the crown resting in its place. Even from across the room, she caught a faint metallic scent carried on the air, subtle, but unmistakable to her sharpened senses. Her jaw tightened, and positioned herself in a front-row seat, her posture rigid as stone. She could feel Camilla's eyes on her from the opposite side of the room, though she didn't return the gaze. Instead, Anne watched as Charlotte entered, holding tightly to her mother's hand. The crowd murmured in admiration as the little girl made her way to the dais. "She looks like a princess already," someone whispered nearby. Anne's heart pounded harder. To everyone else, this was a fairy tale moment. But she knew what lay beneath the surface. This wasn't a coronation, it was a battlefield. The orchestra struck up a regal tune as the master of ceremonies stepped forward. His voice boomed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, today we honor the bright future of the House of Windsor." Anne's fingers drummed against her thigh, her eyes locked on the crown. Camilla sat like a statue, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But Anne caught a flicker of movement, the way Camilla's fingers tapped once against her armrest, as if counting down. And stomach twisted. Charlotte knelt at the dais, her small face glowing with innocence and pride. The page boy lifted the crown from its cushion and turned toward her, and rose slightly from her seat, her breath catching. The crown caught the light, and for a split second, and thought she saw a faint residue clinging to the inner band, an almost invisible shimmer. Her pulse roared in her ears. By the grace of tradition and the legacy of our foremothers, the master began, we bestow this symbol of honor upon. And shot to her feet. Stop. The word rang out like thunder, startling the page boy and sending ripples of shock through the crowd. The page boy froze, his arms trembling as the crown hovered dangerously close to Charlotte's head, and strode forward, her heels striking the marble like a war drum. Don't move another inch, she commanded. Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed furiously. William stepped forward, his face a storm of confusion. And what in God's name are you doing? Anne's eyes never left the crown. Protecting your daughter. She reached the dais and snatched the crown from the boy's hands. Her fingers tingled where they touched the metal, and she pressed it closer to her face. The acrid scent hit her instantly. It was there, just as she feared, and turned to the crowd, her voice ringing out. This crown is tainted. It's unsafe for anyone to wear. A horrified murmur swept through the room. Catherine clutched Charlotte to her chest, shielding her from the flashing cameras. And is this true? Anne's voice broke as she spoke. Yes. If Charlotte had worn this, she could have collapsed within the hour. Across the room, Camilla slowly stood. Her face was unreadable, but Anne caught the briefest flicker in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or was it irritation? This is madness, Camilla said calmly. The crown was restored with the utmost care. Your accusations are baseless. Anne's grip tightened on the crown. Then you won't object to an immediate investigation. The silence that followed was deafening. The room had descended into chaos. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves breaking against the shore. Some guests leaned forward, straining to hear every word, while others recoiled in shock, clutching at pearls and handkerchiefs. The cameras kept clicking furiously, capturing every angle of the confrontation. And stood at the center of the storm, her figure rigid and unflinching, the ceremonial crown clutched tightly in her hands. Her eyes, sharp and blazing with determination, swept across the hall, daring anyone to challenge her. Charlotte, unaware of the enormity of what had just occurred, whimpered softly in her mother's arms. Catherine rocked her gently, her own face pale, her lips trembling as she tried to process her sister-in-law's words. And William began again, his voice edged with both authority and desperation. Explain yourself. Now. And took a deep breath, her chest heaving as she fought to keep her voice steady. This crown has been tampered with. There is a toxic substance in its lining. If Charlotte had worn it, she might already be collapsing in front of us. Do you understand that? The words hung in the air like a curse. Across the room, Queen Camilla rose to her feet. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, too deliberate. Her lips curved into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is absurd, Camilla said softly, yet her voice carried effortlessly across the vast hall. And this family has tolerated your dramatics for years, but this is treasonous behavior. You've humiliated us before the entire world. Anne's gaze didn't waver. Better humiliation than tragedy. Gasps flared again as the two women locked eyes. For a moment, it seemed as though the centuries of royal protocol and etiquette had evaporated, leaving only raw, unfiltered conflict. A court physician, summoned hastily by one of the attendants, stepped forward nervously. Your Highness, if I may? And thrust the crown toward him. Examine it. Smell it. Tell me I'm wrong. The physician took the crown carefully, his gloved fingers trembling slightly. He bent close, inhaling cautiously. Then he frowned, his brow furrowing. There is an unusual odor, he admitted reluctantly. Metallic. Sharp. It's not typical of gold or enamel work. I would need proper equipment to confirm, but that's enough, and interrupted. This crown is no longer safe. It should be sealed and sent for forensic testing immediately. William turned to his stepmother, confusion flickering in his eyes. Camilla, did you know about this? Camilla's smile didn't falter, but there was a coldness now, a subtle tightening around her mouth. Of course not. This is nothing but an attempt to disrupt a sacred family tradition, and has allowed her paranoia to cloud her judgment. Anne's fingers curled into fists. Don't you dare lecture me about judgment. I saw the way you obsessed over this crown. The way you insisted on handling its restoration personally. I've been watching you, Camilla, and I know what you're capable of. The hall fell utterly silent. In that breathless stillness, Charlotte spoke, her small voice piercing the tension like a bell. Why is everyone fighting? And knelt before her niece, tears glistening in her eyes as she cupped the child's face. Because I love you, Lottie. And I couldn't let anything hurt you. Not today. Not ever. The child nodded faintly, not fully understanding, but comforted by her aunt's fierce embrace. At that moment, Anne's composure cracked. The weight of everything, the suspicion, the fear, the enormity of what she had just done, pressed down on her chest. Her tears spilled freely as she clutched Charlotte tighter, her shoulders shaking. I couldn't let her wear it, and whispered again, this time to herself as much as anyone else. From across the room, Camilla watched the scene unfold. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes glittered with something that sent a fresh chill down Anne's spine. Was it fury? Or something darker, a calculating recognition that her plan, whatever it truly was, had been foiled? Anne didn't know. But she knew this much. The battle wasn't over. The grand ballroom, once alive with applause and celebration, now sat in suffocating silence. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, their faces pale, some whispering to one another while others simply stared at the scene unfolding before them. What was supposed to be a carefully choreographed moment of royal unity had dissolved into chaos. And remained on her knees, her arms wrapped protectively around Charlotte. The child's small hands clung tightly to her aunt's dress, her bright eyes wide with confusion and fear. Catherine knelt beside them, her voice low and soothing as she whispered to her daughter, but her own hands trembled as they brushed Charlotte's hair back from her face. William stood just a few feet away, torn between two forces. His jaw was tight, his fist clenched as he turned first to Anne, then to Camilla, his mind clearly wrestling with which version of events to believe. Behind them, the crown sat sealed in an airtight glass case, guarded by two palace attendants. The physician Anne had summoned earlier hovered nervously near the dais, unwilling to speak again without being directly addressed. Enough of this, Camilla's voice broke the quiet like a knife slicing through cloth. She stood tall, her figure framed against the gleaming chandeliers, her eyes hard and unflinching. This entire spectacle has gone far enough, and has embarrassed this family before the eyes of the world and ruined a historic occasion for no reason beyond her own paranoia. Anne rose slowly, still clutching Charlotte's hand in hers. Her face was pale but steady, her eyes fixed on Camilla with unflinching resolve. You call it paranoia. I call it protecting a child's life. William stepped forward, his voice strained. And you're accusing her of something unthinkable. Do you realize how serious this is? Anne met his gaze. I realize it perfectly. Do you? The weight of her words seemed to settle heavily on William's shoulders. He looked over at Camilla, his expression clouded. Camilla, is there any reason why the crown would contain harmful materials? Any at all? Camilla gave a short, bitter laugh. Of course not. The very idea is ridiculous. This crown was handled by the finest artisans, overseen by experts. To suggest otherwise is to tarnish their reputations and mine. Anne's voice hardened. Then you won't mind if it's examined properly. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. If it must be done, so be it. But when the results prove your accusations false, and I will expect a public apology. Nothing less. Anne didn't flinch. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize. But if I'm right, she let the words hang ominously in the air. The master of ceremonies, unsure how to proceed, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should postpone the remainder of the event until this matter is resolved? King Charles, who had been silent throughout the ordeal, finally rose from his seat. His face was a mask of weariness, his voice quiet but firm. Postpone it. There will be no further ceremony today. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Guards escorted the guests from the hall as whispers spread like wildfire. Some looked at Anne with admiration, others with suspicion. The story of what had happened would be on every front page within the hour. And gently led Charlotte back to Catherine, brushing her niece's cheek tenderly. Stay with her. Don't let her out of your sight, she murmured. Catherine nodded, her eyes glistening. Thank you, and whatever happens next, thank you. And straightened and turned back toward Camilla, who still stood frozen in place, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, Anne thought she saw it again, the flicker in Camilla's eyes. Not fear, not guilt, but something colder, something calculating. It was a look that made Anne's stomach turn. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The palace walls, long accustomed to muffling the sound of scandal, now vibrated with tension. Within hours of the ceremony's abrupt halt, news of the chaos had already leaked. Outside the gates, the press swarmed like hornets, shouting questions and flashing cameras at every car that entered or exited. Was the crown poisoned? Did Princess and accuse Queen Camilla of foul play? Is there a rift in the royal family? Inside, the atmosphere was no calmer. Senior advisors paced the corridors, murmuring about damage control and public statements. The family had retreated to a private chamber, the same one where countless royal crises had been debated and managed in years past. Camilla sat rigidly on a high-backed chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face remained carefully composed, but beneath the surface, a storm brewed. To the outside world, she was still queen consort, an emblem of resilience and composure. But here, in the confines of this room, her calmness felt like a mask stretched too tightly. Across from her, and stood with her arms crossed, her uniform still immaculate despite the emotional upheaval of the morning. She said nothing, but her piercing gaze never left Camilla's face. William broke the silence first. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of his confusion and anger. "Camilla, I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you have any hand in this?" Camilla's eyes flicked to him, a brief flash of indignation breaking through her otherwise serene facade. "How dare you ask me that?" "I'm asking because I need to know." William shot back, his voice rising despite Catherine's calming hand on his arm. "My daughter was nearly crowned with something and believes could have killed her. I need answers." Camilla straightened her spine. "This is an outrageous accusation. I oversaw the restoration because I wanted the ceremony to be perfect. That's all. To suggest I would endanger Charlotte is..." She trailed off, shaking her head as if the thought itself were beneath her, and spoke up then, her tone sharp and unyielding. "If you're innocent, you won't object to an independent investigation." Camilla's lips curled into a thin smile. "Oh, I don't object, but when the investigation clears me, I hope you'll have the dignity to apologize." And jaw tightened. "If it clears you." King Charles, seated at the head of the table, finally spoke. His voice was heavy, each word seeming to cost him great effort. "This family cannot afford another public war. Camilla, allow the crown to be tested, and refrain from further public statements until we know the truth." And didn't flinch. "I will remain silent for now. But if the tests confirm what I suspect, the world deserves to know." Camilla's eyes narrowed. "And if they don't? What then?" And didn't answer. The next few days unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Behind the palace gates, laboratory teams worked under intense security, analyzing the crown for any trace of toxic substances. Every detail of the restoration process was scrutinized, from the polishes used to the hands that had touched it. The public, meanwhile, grew restless. Social media erupted with theories. Was Camilla plotting against Charlotte? Didn't save the monarchy from tragedy? Or is this all a misunderstanding born from old rivalries? Tabloids splashed dramatic headlines across their front pages. Paparazzi camped outside Windsor, hoping for a glimpse of the players in this royal drama. Inside the palace, tension simmered like a pot ready to boil over. Catherine remained mostly in the nursery with Charlotte, keeping her daughter away from the storm. William spent hours with his father, trying to calm his own rising anger, and was relentless. She pored over reports from the jeweler, spoke quietly with trusted staff, and kept an ever-watchful eye on Camilla. And Camilla continued to move through the halls with her usual grace, but there was an edge to her now, a flicker of steel in her eyes when she passed, and the world was watching. And both women knew that when the truth came out, it would either exonerate one of them or destroy the other completely. The crown lay under a sealed glass dome in a high-security laboratory deep within the palace grounds. Around it, a team of scientists and royal-appointed experts worked in tense silence, their gloves moving carefully as they examined every inch of the ancient artifact. The golden filigree and jewels sparkled innocently under sterile lights, but beneath the beauty, they searched for hidden danger. Princess Anne had insisted on personally overseeing the initial stage of the investigation. She stood behind the glass partition, arms folded tightly across her chest, her face carved from stone. Every fiber of her being wanted to step into that room and demand answers, but she knew better than to disturb the meticulous process. Her thoughts churned as she watched. What if she was wrong? What if she had humiliated Camilla and shaken the monarchy's foundations over nothing? But then she remembered the jeweler's words, the acrid scent on the crown, the faint residue shimmering on its inner band. No, she couldn't doubt herself now. Across the palace, Camilla sat in her private suite surrounded by her inner circle of aides. She appeared calm, sipping tea from delicate china, but her knuckles were pale where they gripped the cup. "They're tearing apart the crown as though it were a crime scene," she said softly, her voice carrying an undertone of menace, "and has cast me as a villain before the whole world." "And for what? A sin," she imagined. One aide spoke cautiously. "Your Majesty, if the crown is cleared, the tide of public opinion will turn against her. This could work in your favor." Camilla set her cup down with a sharp clink. "It had better." Meanwhile, whispers spread through the palace staff. Some believed Anne's warnings, recalling Camilla's notorious past and her relentless climb to power. Others dismissed the accusations as paranoia, fueled by years of unspoken tension between the two women. In the laboratory, the lead toxicologist finally straightened, his brow furrowed. "We're detecting traces of arsenic compounds in the inner lining. Very low concentrations, but over prolonged exposure, that could indeed cause harm." And stomach lurched. "Enough harm to endanger a child?" The toxicologist nodded gravely. For someone of Princess Charlotte's size and age, even minimal contact over the course of several hours could trigger severe symptoms: nausea, dizziness, collapse. If worn long enough, potentially fatal. A cold wave swept through Anne's body. She had been right. She gripped the edge of the glass partition tightly, her knuckles turning white. "Prepare your full report," she said. "This must be presented to His Majesty immediately." The toxicologist hesitated. "Do you suspect this was intentional?" Anne's jaw tightened. "That's what we're about to find out." When she emerged from the lab, the corridors seemed even colder than usual. Every glance from passing staff felt weighted, every footstep echoing like a drumbeat of accusation or support. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Catherine." "And is it true?" Catherine's voice was hushed but urgent. "William just heard from Charles. The lab found something dangerous in the crown." "Yes," Anne replied. "It's worse than I thought." Charlotte was seconds away from wearing a trap. On the other end, Catherine inhaled sharply. "And Camilla?" Anne's eyes narrowed as she strode down the hall. "She's either monstrously careless or monstrously cunning. We'll know soon enough." By the time Anne reached the king's private chambers, she found William already there, pacing furiously. Charles sat in an armchair, his face drawn and pale. "You were right," William said before and could speak. "The crown was tainted." The toxicologist confirmed it. Charles's voice was hoarse. "How could this happen? How could anyone in this family allow such negligence, or worse?" And didn't flinch. "That's what we need to determine, and we must do it quietly. The press already suspects something terrible. If they get the full story before we act, it could destroy the monarchy's reputation forever." William ran a hand through his hair. "You're saying this was deliberate, aren't you?" And met his gaze. "I'm saying we can't rule it out." Just then, a soft knock came at the door. Camilla entered without waiting for permission. Her eyes swept over the room, taking in Anne, William, and Charles. "I assume you've all heard the news," she said, her tone calm but clipped. "Yes," Charles replied. His voice was heavy. "Camilla, we need an explanation." She arched an eyebrow. "And I suppose you believe I personally laced the crown with poison?" Anne's voice was icy. "If not you, then someone under your authority. The crown was in your possession for weeks." "Explain that." Camilla stepped closer, her expression unchanging. "You think I would risk everything I've built just to harm a child? How little you know me." Anne's fists clenched at her sides. "Oh, I know you far too well." The news spread like wildfire, igniting every corner of the globe. By dawn the next morning, headlines screamed from tabloid covers and news sites alike. "Toxic crown scandal. Did Queen Camilla endanger Princess Charlotte?" And the hero? Royal drama explodes behind palace walls. Future queen saved from poison plot? Social media erupted into a frenzy, hashtags like #CrownGate and #ProtectCharlotte trending worldwide within hours. Videos from the ceremony, Anne's desperate cry, her dash toward the dais, the stunned faces of the royals, were replayed endlessly on every platform. Clips of Charlotte's innocent expression as her aunt snatched the crown away tugged at heartstrings, sparking outrage and sympathy in equal measure. In coffee shops and office corridors, people whispered and debated. Wasn't a paranoid troublemaker, or had she just saved the monarchy's future? Was Camilla a victim of an unfortunate misunderstanding, or the architect of a sinister plot? Even celebrities weighed in, their comments adding fuel to the fire. "This is horrifying," one popular actress tweeted. "Thank God for Princess Anne. What if she hadn't spoken up?" Another high-profile personality took the opposite side. "This looks like royal family infighting gone too far. Camilla deserves better than these accusations." Talk show hosts dissected every detail. Experts in body language were brought in to analyze Camilla's expressions during the ceremony, while historians debated the crown's past and whether such an incident could really have been accidental. Public opinion fractured. In one camp, and was lauded as a heroine, a steadfast protector of her niece who had the courage to defy protocol and speak out. "She's the only one in that family I trust anymore," said one commentator on a viral video clip. "If it hadn't been there, little Charlotte might not be alive today." In the other camp, critics accused Anne of overstepping, of creating drama and tarnishing Camilla's reputation without definitive proof. This was a restoration error, not a murder plot, one palace insider told a gossip column anonymously, and jumped to conclusions and humiliated her family in front of the world. Amid the uproar, Buckingham Palace released a carefully worded statement. "We are aware of public concern regarding the ceremonial crown. As a precaution, the crown is undergoing comprehensive testing. The safety of the royal family is paramount, and the results will be shared once confirmed. At this time, we urge the public to avoid speculation." The statement, instead of calming the storm, only fueled it further. "If they're asking us not to speculate, that means they're hiding something," one viral post declared. At Windsor, the royals were in lockdown. Security had been tightened, and advisors worked around the clock to manage the spiraling crisis. William, caught between his stepmother and his aunt, struggled to keep his emotions in check. Behind closed doors, he vented his frustration to Catherine. "This family is falling apart in front of the cameras," he said, pacing the floor of their private quarters. "And sure, she's right. Camilla swears she's innocent. And the public? They're choosing sides like this is a football match." Catherine watched him with quiet concern. "You know, and would never do this unless she truly believed Charlotte was in danger." "I know," William admitted. "But if she's wrong, the damage is already done. Camilla may never recover from this." Across the palace, and remained resolute. The toxicology report had confirmed her fears, but she knew the battle wasn't over. Not yet. In her private study, she drafted a statement she hoped she'd never have to release. The truth must come out, no matter how high the cost. If that crown had touched Charlotte's head, we might be mourning her today instead of debating protocols and appearances. But she hesitated to send it. Releasing such words would set fire to an already raging inferno. Meanwhile, Camilla moved like a shadow through the halls. Her public mask remained intact, serene, measured, but behind closed doors, her temper flared. "She's turned me into a villain," Camilla hissed to one of her aides. "I won't allow her to ruin everything I built." Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "If Anne wants a war, she'll get one." The battle lines were drawn, not just within the family, but in the hearts of the public. Everyone was waiting for the final truth. Would it vindicate Anne? Or would it expose her as the architect of the monarchy's latest and most explosive scandal? And sat alone in her private quarters, the weight of the last few days pressing on her like a stone slab. Outside her window, Windsor's manicured garden stretched out in serene beauty, but inside her chest, there was no peace. She had spent her entire life upholding the values of the monarchy, duty, honor, loyalty, and now she felt she was standing on the edge of a knife, one wrong step away from destroying the very institution she had sworn to protect. The toxicology report had confirmed her suspicions, yet the questions still circled endlessly in her mind. Had Camilla deliberately endangered Charlotte? Or had this all been an appalling oversight, a tragic mistake that no one had intended? She hadn't slept in 2 nights. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Charlotte kneeling on the dais, the crown descending toward her tiny head, and imagined the unthinkable. The child collapsing in front of a global audience, her bright blue eyes dimming as chaos erupted. The thought made Anne's stomach twist. There was a soft knock at her door. Anne didn't answer. A moment later, Catherine entered quietly, her face drawn and pale. She carried with her an air of fragility, as though a single harsh word might shatter her entirely. And she said softly, "Can we talk?" and gestured to the chair opposite her. Catherine sat down, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Catherine broke the silence. "I don't even know how to thank you," and shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. Not until we know the whole truth." "But you saved her," Catherine insisted, her voice cracking. "You saved Charlotte's life, and I can't stop thinking about what could have happened, what we might have lost." Anne's throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, knuckles pale where she gripped her knees. "I didn't even think. I just saw the crown, smelled the chemicals, and my body moved before my mind caught up." Tears filled Catherine's eyes. "What made you suspect Camilla?" And exhaled slowly, the weight of her answer heavy on her shoulders. It wasn't just one thing. It was the way she controlled the restoration, how she refused to let the jeweler inspect the inner band, the strange polish they used. And then there was the way she spoke about Charlotte. Catherine's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Anne's voice hardened. "I overheard her speaking to an aide. She said, even the child must learn she is not untouchable. I can't get those words out of my head. They felt like a warning. Or worse." Catherine shivered. "Do you really think she meant to harm Charlotte?" Anne's jaw tightened. "I don't know. That's what terrifies me the most." The two women sat in silence, the crackle of the fireplace the only sound between them. After a long pause, Anne's voice softened, almost breaking. "You know, when I was Charlotte's age, Mother used to tell me that being royal meant carrying the weight of 1,000 expectations, but also that we were to protect each other, always. I promised her I'd do that, even if it meant standing alone." Catherine reached across the table and took Anne's hand in hers. "You're not alone." And looked up, her eyes glistening. "Aren't I? The rest of them think I've gone mad. William won't even look me in the eye. And Charles, he's so desperate for peace he'd rather believe I'm the villain than face what's happening right under his nose. William will come around," Catherine said gently. "He just needs time to process all of this." Anne's lips pressed into a thin line. Time is the one thing we don't have. If Camilla is capable of this, who knows what else she's planning? At that moment, there was another knock at the door. This time it was William, his face strained and tired. He stepped into the room, glancing at his wife before fixing his gaze on his aunt. "We need to talk," he said quietly. And straightened. "About the crown?" William nodded. "And about what happens next." He hesitated, then added, "And I need to know. Look me in the eyes and tell me, do you truly believe Camilla tried to harm my daughter?" And held his gaze without flinching. "Yes. In my heart, I believe it." William exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "Then we can't let this go. But if we're going to expose her, we need proof, irrefutable proof. Otherwise, this will tear the family apart." And nodded grimly. "Then let's find it."